After scanning a book about German North African aces, I stumbled on a letter written by Hans-Arnold Stahlschmidt, in which he describes the 3rd of September 1942 as his hardest combat. It sounded like a good story to try to visualize. The event takes place in Egypt in the Sahara Desert near the coast of the Mediterranean, just prior to the Second Battle of El Alamein. The Africa Corps started an advance south of El Alamein around the 30th of August. German and Italian forces advanced for several days before starting to retreat. They were outnumbered about 2-1 by the British in terms of tanks, and they had supply line problems, so they couldn't sustain their advance. Part of this documentary deals with Allied Desert Air Force bombing efforts to attack German supply lines and cripple the advancing Africa Corps. From the book BF 109 Aces of North Africa and the Mediterranean, author Jerry Scutts writes, "Earlier that same day, Marseille and Stahlschmidt were part of a small force that intercepted a dawn raid consisting of RAF Bostons and Baltimores, plus U.S. Army Air Force's B-25s. Total light bomber sorties for that day alone totaled 200. They were covered by Desert Air Force Kitty Hawks, Hurricanes, and Spitfires, plus American P-40Fs. In response, the Luftwaffe flew no less than 130 sorties, consisting of free-yacht sweeps." 3 groups of bombers are depicted in this video. Their stories are derived from actual records from the Desert Air Force Squadron Operations Record books. The first bomb group shown is escorted by 5 Squadrons, South African Air Force. They were flying Tomahawks in early September, and they claimed they provided top cover to 12 Bostons and 6 Baltimores. The target was 24 miles southeast of El Alamein. The bomb run was from northeast to southwest. It seems that 12 Bostons took off at 0650 hours for the first raid of the day. That was 12 Squadron, South African Air Force. There were only 3 serviceable aircraft in 4 Squadron, South African Air Force. They were flying Kitty Hawks. Their first operation of the day was a high top cover for 18 Bostons. Pilots were Lieutenant Cahew, Pilot Officer Scudts, and Lieutenant Leppin. Their records show that the bombing took place from 7,000 to 8,000 feet, where the Kitty Hawks were at 11,000 feet. Records show that 24 Squadron South African Air Force Bostons took off at 0735 hours. They state, "We proceeded on a mission to bomb 900 badly dispersed enemy MT at MR 889252. MT is motor transports, and MR may indicate map region." It seems the 3 bomber groups shown were all targeting the same area about 24 miles southeast of El Alamein. 24 Squadron records show that 3 B-25s of the 12th Bomb Group were flying with the squadron on that mission. The American bombers had been in Egypt since the 31st of July, 1942. They were being trained in RAF tactics by actually flying with the RAF. The 24 Squadron was escorted by 2 Squadrons, South African Air Force Kitty Hawks. At 0710 they took off with Major Collenbrander leading 4 of them and 8 of the 64th Fighter Squadron as top cover to 18 Bostons. The American 64th Fighter Squadron, which was part of the 57th Fighter Group, had arrived in Palestine in July of 1942. They transferred from their base in the United States via the USS Ranger aircraft carrier and flew their aircraft, which were P-40Fs, off the deck of the carrier to Ghana. They went on 300-mile hops led by RAF bombers to Palestine, where they began training operations. While on board the carrier, the pilots had time to paint names on their aircraft. This transfer of the 57th Fighter Group to Egypt actually happened in July, 4 months before the Americans invaded Morocco as part of Operation Torch. During and after Operation Torch, American aircraft were painted with a yellow ring surrounding the American star. This is 274 Squadron. A dozen Hurricane Mark II-Bs were airborne flying as top cover to 127 Squadron, which was also flying Hurricane Mark II-Bs. They were on an intercept of enemy transports. One of the dozen aircraft flown by Flight Sergeant Gordon had engine trouble and was forced to turn back and landed at 0830. That left 11 Hurricanes. The 274 Squadron Hurricanes, once they reached the corner of the bulge, flying at 7,000 feet, observed several Bostons escorted by Kitty Hawks that were being attacked by two 109s. The 11 Hurricanes of 274 Squadron were then attacked by 6 plus 109s, and their operations record describes it as general melee ensued. Anti-aircraft was heavy over the Africa Corps. 12 Squadron South African Air Force describes the anti-aircraft fire as deadly accurate. Several aircraft being holed, and one observer, Lieutenant Raby, was wounded in the leg by shrapnel. The 24 Squadron Bostons described it as the formation encountered heavy but inaccurate ACAC over the target. 2 aircraft were slightly holed. The hydraulic system of one bomber was damaged by ACAC, causing the undercarriage failure. The pilot successfully belly landed the aircraft on our landing ground. All aircraft returned safely. Four Squadron South African Air Force Kitty Hawks described visibility over the bomb area as good, but owing to our having to keep a lookout for enemy aircraft, which were frequently reported in the vicinity, bombing results could not be observed. However, 2 aircraft were seen burning on the ground. 2 Squadron South African Air Force Kitty Hawks reported that bombing from 9,000 feet was good. 5 enemy aircraft were encountered over the target at 16,000 feet. They made 1 attack without result. The Bostons from 24 Squadron claimed that all bombs, except for 4 that hung up, fell on the general target area, with good results. 3 direct hits and several near misses were seen on badly dispersed vehicles. As far as the bombing goes, op records from 12 Squadron state that on 4 September 1942, a letter was received from the Army, the 8th Army, that the attacks by 12 and 24 Squadrons had stopped a German counterattack on the New Zealanders. Presumably that was the counterattack that was happening in late August and early September. 8 145 Squadron Spitfire Mark Vs were scrambled to Borg El Arab and were then vectored on to several formations of friendly bombers to protect them from enemy fighters. In all, 17 enemy aircraft were encountered, including Me-109s, MC-200s, and MC-202s. These last had red spinners. The operations record claims that Squadron Leader Matthews probably destroyed an MC-202 that morning. Eight aircraft from JG-27 were in the air that morning too. The small force was led by Hans-Joachim Marseille. Marseille was the Staffelkapitän of the 3rd Staffel of JG-27. He was a recognized expert at deflection shooting. He claimed 17 aircraft shot down in a single day just 2 days before September 3rd. Those claims were spread out over 3 missions he flew that day. Along with Marseille, Hans-Arnold Stahlschmidt was also in that group. Stahlschmidt was the Staffelkapitän of the 2nd Staffel of JG-27. He had over 50 victories at that point in his career. The Germans were flying Bf-109Fs, which could fly higher than the Tomahawks and the Kitty Hawks, although the American P-40Fs had Merlin-powered engines with the early single-stage 2-speed supercharger. The operations record for the 3 Kitty Hawks of 4 Squadrons, South African Air Force, say that Scutts states that he shot 3 109s off the tail of Lieutenant Leppin. With the result, he got separated from the formation and was compelled to fly in a defensive circle with Hurricanes and Spitfires. Fred Scutts was an American volunteer who flew with an American Eagle Squadron during the Battle of Britain. He also flew at Malta and spent 17 months here in Egypt flying with the Desert Air Force. Eventually he transferred to the U.S. Army Air Forces. I'd like to read a letter that Stahlschmidt wrote to his family. Today I have experienced my hardest combat, but at the same time it has been my most wonderful experience of comradeship in the air. We were 8 Messerschmitts in the middle of an incredible whirling mass of enemy fighters. I flew my 109 for my life. I worked with every gram of energy, and by the time we finished, I was foaming at the mouth and utterly exhausted. Again and again we had enemy fighters on our tails. I was forced to dive 3 or 4 times, but I pulled up again and rushed back into the turmoil. Once I seemed to have no escape. I had flown my 109 to its limits, but a Spitfire still sat behind me. At the last moment, Marseille shot it down 50 meters from my 109. I dived and pulled up. Seconds later, I saw a Spitfire behind Marseille. I took aim at the enemy. I had never aimed so carefully. And he dived down burning. After it was all over, Stahlschmidt reported that he and Marseille were the only ones left in the air. For the 8 145 Squadron Spitfires, Pilot Officer Bickler and Sergeant Small each claimed an Me-109. Sergeant Power's aircraft was shot down, and he received a large number of wounds. The operations records state that he never returned. An ops record for 4 Squadron South African Air Force, the 3 Kitty Hawks, states that Scutts claimed 2 109Fs destroyed. For the 8 Tomahawks of 5 Squadron, their record states that over the target, our cover was jumped by 3 Me-109s, one of which was damaged by Lieutenant D.W. Murdoch. A barely readable 2 Squadron South African Air Force Kitty Hawk record appears to state 3 U.S. Army Air Force pilots flew on this operation. All returned. It appears no bombers were destroyed by the Luftwaffe on the sorties that took place early that morning. For 274 Squadron, the dozen Hurricanes, Pilot Officer Mitchell claimed 1 Me-109 damaged. The 11 Hurricanes that hadn't turned back landed at 0905 hours. And wrapping up with the end of Stahlschmidt's letter, at the end of the combat, only Marseille and I were left in the dogfight. Each of us had 3 kills. At home, we climbed out of our planes and were thoroughly exhausted. Marseille had bullet holes in his 109, and I had 11 in mine. We embraced each other but were unable to speak. It was an unforgettable event. That's the end.